in many ways, it's like talking about breathing. It's like, well, what is there to say? I breathe in, I breathe out. It's just a fact of life. I feel kind of the same way about shame. Okay, it's recording.
Okay. I was like, I know we're in 150 something. Yeah.
Which, by the way, we did an episode where we talked about like where we would be at 150, and we forgot to acknowledge that 150 came and went.
Something I was thinking of that is still a while away, so we probably will forget this as well by the time it comes along.
Everyone get out your notepads.
My first episode with you was number 90. So once we reach 180, I'll have been on more than I haven't.
Oh, yeah. That'll be here before we know it.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, God. Hello, friends.
Hello, friends.
And welcome back to Pickles and Vodka, a mental health podcast. We missed last week, but we're not going to feel ashamed about it.
That's right.
See what I did there?
I do.
I'm Christina.
And I'm Lauren.
We missed a week because, you know, shit was going on. We were just really overloaded with stress, both of us. And I think we're past the phase where we like push ourselves to get the podcast out every week, no matter what.
That's a good way to put it, where both of us were just kind of like, it's not that we could not make the time for an hour and a half to sit down and do this, but we're both feeling clearly behind and stressed and had so much going on that we're just like, it's going to be worse for me if I force myself to do it.
Yeah, we want to put out the best episodes, and when we are burnt out, we just can't do that. So yeah, not ashamed about it. But Lauren, you were at your mom's wedding 2 weekends ago.
Mm-hmm.
The reason that we wanted to record today is because, well, you had something you wanted to talk about in particular.
I mean, it wasn't something that it's just like, oh my gosh, this is huge. It's on my mind. It's really timely. But we did say like, well, we'll just try and come up with something. And I just like some thoughts and things that happened over the week is I just floated to Christina. I was like, can we just talk about shame?
Yes.
I didn't have to ask that. I know both of us could talk about shame. But...
Yeah, I could talk about shame forever and ever. Amen. It's been a while since we did a themed episode.
Yeah.
We used to do them all the time. So today we'll be featuring shame. But first, there's a few housekeeping things I want to touch on. First and foremost, we finally have a website.
Yay!
I posted about this on our Instagram, but we have a Substack, which is basically just like a blog / place where you can find all our info in one place. And most importantly, you can enter your email and get updates from us when we have those. I don't know. Yeah. I feel like I'm doing a bad job of selling it to people.
I went on it briefly when we first talked about it, and yeah, it seems like a good way to organize everything. It makes sense. If you like what we're doing, then you should like their setup.
Yeah, so go to picklesandvodka.substack.com and subscribe. It's free. You can also become a paid subscriber if you want to help us make this podcast long term. But you don't have to, and we won't hold it against you if you don't.
I was just like, let me sit back and see how uncomfortable Christina gets while she mentions this part.
All right, it's done. That's it. Okay. I am not going to tell you guys to do anything else this whole episode, except go subscribe, please, because that would make us happy. After you become a subscriber on our Substack, you have the option to join our chat, which is where we basically talk to you all about ideas you have for the podcast, feedback, that kind of thing. And so there is a chat open right now where we ask what topics you want to hear about. So the first thing you can do when you subscribe is go and answer that.
Yeah.
That would be cool.
Help a brother out. Give us a topic.
Sure. Okay, Lauren, where the fuck are you at? It's been a while since we talked.
It has. Other than our voracious text messaging, which means like twice a week.
I'm practically smothering you.
Right. I guess since you brought it up, I mean, I don't know how much more there is to say, but, you know, I did go to my mom's wedding. It was pretty nice. It was small. They had it at like a meeting room in the hotel, so we didn't even have to like leave the hotel all weekend. It was really simple and easy, and a nice thing. The guy she's marrying has 2 daughters that are a bit younger than me. One of them's like 4 or 5 years younger than me, and one's like 2 years younger than that. So they're in between our ages.
Nice.
So yeah, the first time I'm going to be meeting essentially my new stepsisters is at our parents' wedding.
That sounds like the plot of a drama.
Right?
Like a dramatic comedy.
Yeah, you definitely could make it much more dramatic than it actually was, which is that they are both really nice. One of them, after the wedding, because it still was kind of like late afternoon and she lived in the area, was like, if everyone wants to come over, we can just like hang out at my place and we'll order pizzas for everyone and we can just still, like sit around and chat and stuff like that. And when we got there, when we're sitting around the table, this was my favorite part, is just seeing like these two clearly, like I said, I think there's like 2 years between them. They have some sort of sister connection, which just was so much fun to watch because... Oh
yeah, you never had that.
Yeah. They were going around and it was like, they were talking to everybody in my family. It seemed like almost like, I don't think on purpose, but they were singling them out like one at a time and they were tag teaming. It was like, it felt like a job interview if job interviews were not stressful and were fun. They're just, because they're just like, Lauren, tell us what St. Louis is like. I've never been there. And, they're just like bouncing off each other. And then they turn to my niece. They're like, Josie, tell us what your dance class is. And,
wow.
And it just was like such a tag team effort that I was just like, I'm kind of getting a kick out of this. But yeah, they were very nice.
Did you get to like spend some time with your mom?
A little bit, because she had like a suite room. So her and I had adjoining rooms. And the first night was the night before the wedding. So I mostly like hung out in her room beforehand. And obviously the night after the wedding, then her new husband was in the room and I was not interested in being in that room.
Well, yeah.
But the first night, it was mostly like us hanging out.
Aw, that sounds wholesome.
Yeah, pretty much.
And then coming back, how was that?
I think part of what set me up to be like super stressed the whole next week is coming back. My flight was supposed to leave at 4:45 because there just wasn't really much else to do. And my mom's always paranoid about getting there on time anyways. They got me to the airport almost 3 hours early. But I'm like, well... It's the Detroit airport. It's pretty big. I can find something to do for, 2 hours and then they'll be getting ready to board and all that stuff. So I wasn't too worried. My flight gets delayed an hour and a half.
Ugh.
And then it gets delayed again. And then it gets delayed again.
Oh my God.
I sat in the airport for 6 hours.
Ugh. I hate it when that happens.
It was funny because I guess they said that the original plane had an equipment problem, so they were getting us a new plane, which, I can't fault them for that delay. Go ahead. Please get me a working plane.
Yeah. But how do you feel about flying in general? Do you get anxiety?
I don't. And I don't fly very often, and I probably haven't in a few years. And I realized this time that I do hate flying, but it's just because it's such a hassle and it's so annoying. That's the part I hate.
Yeah.
I don't care about the flying part.
How are you feeling today?
Okay. I mean, that's just kind of a result of the whole week, which we can get into that more when we start talking on our main topic. Where are you at?
Where am I at? I was just talking to my psychiatrist about this a couple days ago, but my depression's been getting a lot worse.
Mm-hmm.
And it could be like any number of things. I got my IUD replaced last week, which I don't want to get into too much detail about, but it had been 9 years and I had just let this fear of that operation like build up for years. It was fine, but it was just like, I don't know, my hormones are all over the place right now. And so...
Fair enough.
My dad turned 70 on May 1st, but we had this giant party for him a few days ago. My mom has been stressing about this party for months. A lot of our extended family members were going to be there, people that I hadn't seen in years. And so I was really anxious about it. I don't know why, and we can get into this too, but in our family, there's this kind of invisible pressure to go along with appearances.
Yes.
I don't know. I have always, as long as I can remember, been feeling like people are watching me and expecting things of me that I can't possibly fulfill. And a lot of the times it's just me putting the expectations on myself. Like, there's actually no one out there being like, what's Christina doing? Like,
yeah.
I don't know. The depression's been getting worse. Anxiety's been getting worse. It's hard to be around people lately without just getting totally exhausted. And yeah, I guess I have been struggling with some thoughts of shame in this situation, that this relapse is stretching out so long.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to agree as in like, yeah, you should, but that's kind of a lot of where my main shame feelings stem from, I feel like. So I get that.
Yeah. So why don't we segue into the topic? What made you want to talk about shame in particular?
So, a few things. I think this is a good one to start. I think maybe this is what kicked it off. So my roommate is in treatment right now.
Yes.
But she is in PHP, and I think we mentioned on one of the episodes that I feel like their PHP is slowly failing because they have 0 weekend programming now. She's trying to find things to fill the time. So I've been doing some things with her sometimes. And last weekend, one of her friends in PHP has a chow, very cute, and she wanted him to meet Pico, and we've gone to that dog cafe coffee shop before, and we thought like that'd be a great place for them to meet. And I did not realize, I thought it was going to be maybe her one treatment friend who had stopped by our apartment before, and this girl and her dog. But it actually was them plus the girl's boyfriend plus 3 other people she's in treatment with right now. And I get it. I get that this is your life right now, but there were a few points I know where everyone's sitting around talking. And I mean, we're in a public spot. It's just kind of like a big room, and a few other people were there, reading, having coffee, hanging out with their dogs and stuff like that. And they're bringing up the standard therapy type questions, making a joke out of it.
What do you mean?
I feel like I could be more creative than just saying and how does that make you feel? Because there is, but that sort of thing, the question a therapist would ask you, and they're talking about how an eating disorder treatment, then for your meals, they're very structured, and ours in particular, the people that are allowed to portion out their own, then it's 15 minutes before, then they yell out portioning, and you all come and do that, and then when you're supposed to start your time, then they yell sitting, and everybody comes in, and so they're just making jokes about that and yelling these things out, and I'm just kind of I feel so awkward. I don't want people to think that I'm part of this life, even though I was as much as a year ago.
I was expecting that to go in a different direction. You felt jealous of the connection that they all had. Because that's kind of how I feel sometimes if I'm not actively in treatment and I'm around people who are.
Yeah, and I will admit that when I recognize myself just wanting to kind of slink into the chair and be invisible, please don't notice me, then for a brief second I did think of that, because I agree with you usually, and I was just maybe that's a sign of growth. I don't want to be part of this.
So in that moment, you felt shame at the possibility of being associated with these people who were clearly part of some mental program?
Oh, yeah, that was it. The first thing is that a girl comes in with a muffin and she's like, well, I got to log this in recovery record. And I'm just kind of what would you think if you just heard that?
I mean, honestly, I feel like the average person doesn't notice or care.
Probably not, but I think as it kept going on, that's when I really started to just kind of feel this is kind of getting a little awkward at this point.
So what did you do?
We only sat there for an hour and a half, so, I just kind of joined the conversations that didn't feel as awkward. and I mean, there's a lot of dogs running around, so there is, things to keep you occupied. So
that got you thinking about shame in general?
Yeah, because that's what I was trying, like you said, you said usually you feel just this kind of, maybe, we've talked about things being wistful or nostalgic.
Yeah.
Oh, I miss the camaraderie and stuff like that. That's usually how I think I would feel. So Yeah, I think I was just kind of like questioning myself, like, what am I feeling if it just kind of made me uncomfortable? And I was thinking, I think I'm a little ashamed to be like wanting to immediately stand up and be like, I'm not part of this, just so you know. I don't need to be watched 24/7.
As you talk about this, I keep thinking of being a kid and going places with my large family. And that's how I would feel around my family. I would be so embarrassed to be seen with them. You know, I mean, all teenagers feel like this to some extent, I feel like.
Yeah, but I can see that you notice that, like, there's a collection of kids.
Well, yeah, we were that weird homeschooling family. Like, it was very obvious that we were outsiders. And I hated that people would lump me in as an outsider before they even got to know me, just because, I mean, I was awkward and antisocial, and I didn't dress like everyone else, and I didn't get the references. And in many ways, you know, I'm still like that, because of the way I was raised.
I wondered if you might have experienced this part as well, since I know your family was very religious. And this was something else about the wedding, because my mom just seems to be getting like more and more 24/7 praise Jesus type, which is a bit much when I'm around her. I felt the feeling you were talking about. My family was the one that would pray in restaurants before meals.
Oh, yeah. Our family always does that still.
It had gotten to a point where just my grandparents did that, I felt like. But I'm like, yep, all that weekend. Yep, my mom was doing it too. And I was like, okay.
So I think it's pretty clear that we're both people who care what people think about us.
Yes.
And I mean, that is the root of shame, I think, is feeling like there's something wrong with you. And other people shun you as a result or judge you as a result, whether or not they're actually shunning you or judging you. It's perceived in some cases. But I think if I had to define what shame meant to me, it would be just the idea that there's something wrong with me and it's reprehensible somehow.
In some of the notes that I was taking over the week, just saying like, what was I feeling shame about? And I just have like 2 big points. Says, for having problems in the first place and for not being fixed.
I mean, let's look at those. For having problems in the first place, that's an interesting one because obviously everyone has problems.
Right.
And yet we act like we're supposed to reach this state where we don't have any problems.
For me, and it's silly that this is especially with the mental health stuff because I feel like that's something that these 2 things are not related to, but I would really come down on myself for a lot of that stuff because I would learn so much about it and like the reasonings behind why this is happening and the physicality and all of that stuff. And what I always felt like is I should not deal with these things because I am smarter than that.
That's the big one.
Yeah, and then I would like immediately like feel embarrassed, like, what? I think I'm that smart?
Exactly.
Like I have to turn around and slap myself down for that too.
Yeah, oh man, I can relate so hard to that. Yeah, I will say I have not taken any notes this week. I don't know. I feel like my whole life is a study in shame. So I was like, just show up and you'll be able to talk about it. But I'm curious to see what else you had in your notes.
I think probably because like you, I have felt like this past week, just like depression has been like really ramped up.
Yeah.
And then things that happen as a result, like a big one, the beginning of this week, I have my aerial classes on Monday nights now. And I mean, it's Monday at 7:30. It's kind of a hard time to get to in general.
Yeah.
But this week was the first time that, you know, when I got home and I let Pico out and I fed both the animals and everything like that, I was just like, I can't this week. I really, really can't. And it's the first time that, like, there's been times where I've felt that way and I've pushed myself into going anyways. And I mean, you know, my evidence is usually like, I feel really good after class, even though I was like exhausted and didn't think I could do it. But, you know, this is the first time since I started doing this in, I want to say October. Like, it's literally the first class that I missed. That I just was like, nope. And so that made me, you know, instantly, favorite term, shame spiral.
Yep.
where I immediately just think like, well, that's it. You've convinced yourself that you don't have to go 1 week, so it's just going to keep going like that. It's going to be easier to do it next week, and then you're never going to go back. And You thought that this was going to be something, that was going to be good for you, but you just ruined it like everything else. So.
Oh, yeah. The shame spiral is so real.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Once you start, opening that wound, so to speak, it's really hard to forget that it's there.
Describe that a little better.
I mean, I started doing more activism stuff these past 6 months. And I started showing up at events and educating myself and introducing myself to new people and offering my small services wherever I can. And on the outside, I guess I was helpful, but on the inside, I kept comparing myself to everyone else. It's like going to any social event. I'll use that as an example. It's hard to get myself to show up. But once I show up, I'm usually fine. I'm usually able to fake it.
Yes.
But there's always a moment of insecurity where, like I said earlier, maybe I miss a reference. Something flies over my head or something comes up and it's clear to me that everyone else knows about it and I don't. And that's when things kind of start getting harder to fake for me. Once that first insecurity comes in, those thoughts will start coming. Like, yes. Everyone knows you're a freak. Everyone's making fun of you. Nobody wants to be around you. And it's just like a scab that you can't stop picking, even though I know that these things aren't true, even though I know it'll only get worse if I keep touching it. I can't stop until it's all I can think about and I end up leaving the event early or maybe canceling future events because the shame spiral has just gotten so bad.
That is such a good way to describe it, because for me, I feel like what my similar thing that I've been going through is basically just dealing with the people at work. Like, everybody at work is nice, but I feel like a lot of my coworkers kind of have these connections and, it feels like they like each other and I'm sort of on the outside. I try to just go on like normal. I'll hang out with people. I'll sit with them all at lunch. And, this is probably like my mind blowing things out of proportion. But it's like you said, as soon as one thing happens, mm-hmm. and I know like I do not care to have any of my coworkers on my Facebook page. So it should be fine. But as soon as someone says, oh, I saw you posted pictures of such and such that you went to, and then it's like, oh, they're like friends outside of work and keep tabs on each other. But, I'm just this girl that comes in and we guess she's not too weird. So that's how I end up feeling.
Yeah. I think I don't know. I'm trying to think. Sorry. I thought I would be like more in a podcasting mood today.
That's all right. Both of us still have a little bit of a life is too much hungover.
I mean, talk about shame. I feel ashamed of pretty much everything I put out online lately. And I feel ashamed at the fact that I'm unable to do things that I used to be able to do. And most people would look at me and not hold that against me. Like, I am trying to look at myself in an empathetic way and be like, you have a disability, you have mental illness, you're going through a lot, whatever. You're not a bad person. You're just dealing with a lot right now. But literally, I will be my sickest and trying to help everyone else. And when I can't, instead of being like, maybe I should draw some boundaries, I'm like, you're just not good enough. Like,
yeah.
You should be able to do this. It's all about like should, could, yes. Like expectations. I think it's important to talk about on the podcast, even if we don't really know what point we're making. I think that you can only deal with shame when you put it out in the open, as cliche as that sounds.
Right.
But the thing about shame is that it's often a deeply personal secret thing.
Yeah, like it sits there and makes you not want to open up about it at all. Just like, no, I'll keep hiding it. I'll keep shoving it deeper in this box, and at some point it will go away, right? And it doesn't.
Yeah, and then you start like having shame about the shame, and yeah, it just becomes a spiral. And shame is kind of hard to talk about because it is such a huge part of my identity. in many ways, it's like talking about breathing. It's like, well, what is there to say? I breathe in, I breathe out. It's just a fact of life. I feel kind of the same way about shame. It's like, yeah, I feel shame all the time. But talking about it today, I think it's important to ask, like, why do we feel so much shame? And like, how does it affect us in our actions, like on a daily basis as people who struggle with mental illness? How do you think shame most shows up in your life?
I think what's hard about shame is that it's different from guilt.
Yes.
Because that's something I was thinking is, guilt could be like, I did not get this thing done that I set out to do because instead a friend called and I decided, to just ignore it and go do that instead. So, it's kind of like, that was my choice and I feel guilty now because I should have completed that thing I wanted to. Where shame is just like, you just personally are like, I just am a failure. And it doesn't feel like there's anything you can do. You're just like, it's just me. It's just because I exist.
Yeah. I think a therapist explained it to me once. Guilt is what happens when you feel like you've done something bad. And shame is when you feel like you are bad.
Yeah. And that's what I think it makes it so tough is like you can feel guilty about something and you usually have something then that you can pinpoint like, wow, this is what I should have done. So I have something to work on. If I would not like to feel this again, I won't make that same choice. But shame is just kind of like, I just am this.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I think guilt can sometimes be conducive to growth. Hot take.
Yeah, no, I agree.
No, like if I go out and I buy a bottle of wine and I drink it, even though I'm not supposed to on my meds, the next day I'm obviously going to feel guilty for doing that. And maybe I should because I did know better. But then shame is when I say, I went out and did that because I'm a filthy addict and I'm never going to change. And that kind of has the opposite effect. Instead of being spurred to like get better, I'll just be like, it doesn't matter. I can't change who I am. I'm just going to go buy another one.
Yeah, that's you just telling yourself like, this all sucks and it can't be helped. It's just who I am. Yeah.
And that's really hard to get over, especially if you've had shame kind of hammered into you your whole life, or in my case, hammered into yourself. Yeah, like how do you even begin to tear that apart? I mean, like I said, talking about it really helps. Some of the best tools that I found to combat shame in my life have just been, and this sounds really shallow, but getting genuine compliments from people who know me. Because the thing is, when you're dealing with shame like this, you're always assuming that people hate everything about you or they're judging you negatively all the time. The judgment thing is huge.
Yes.
And so when someone tells me that they like a piece of art that I made or they resonated with something we said on this podcast, for instance.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's like, okay, maybe some of this shame is undeserved.
Yeah, it's almost like, obviously, one comment cannot turn everything around, but it does spark
debatable.
But it does spark something really quick that at least is just, wow, maybe I'm not terrible.
Yeah, and that's why it's so important to tell people in your life why you like having them in your life. Like, that goes so far.
Yeah.
And it also helps just to learn more about other people's experiences with shame and realize that you're not alone. Like, I don't really ever talk about this on the podcast, but I have a lot of sexual shame from growing up with purity culture. Yeah. We'll probably do an episode about it at some point, maybe with a guest who can like help us talk about it. Yeah. But I know that I have a lot of shame around that, and it's really holding me back in life. And so the other week, I signed up for this webinar. It's by Erica Smith. She is a sex educator on Instagram, and she does this course called Sex Ed for Purity Culture Dropouts. Or something like that. But I went to one of them, and it was so good. Like, there were a lot of Q&As she did with the participants about their experiences, and like every single person had dealt with crippling shame at some point in their life. And it was so good to just realize, oh, I'm not the only one. We all are this way for a reason. And by talking about it and educating ourselves that like, hey, this is actually a common thing that human beings struggle with. I don't know. It really helped. Just like putting it out into the light, so to speak.
Yeah, I would be interested in checking out something like that because it's not something that I really talk about, but I'm on board with you. I feel the same way. I don't feel like I got it drilled into my head necessarily as much as you did, but I feel like my growing up was kind of like, I just got the basics told, you know, like, sex is bad, sex is only for having babies, and then I feel like my family just felt like, we've told you that, we know that you know this message, so we are just never going to talk about anything at all sexual now. You know what to do.
And
we
you
don't
know
talk
what?
about it.
When you tell kids, or anyone for that matter, that they shouldn't talk about something, guess what that breeds?
Yeah.
Shame.
Exactly.
If there's anything that's like so off limits you can't talk about it in polite society, then, especially if it's something like sex that every fucking human on earth thinks about, then that person is going to have a lot of shame.
Man, you've got me thinking about this shit a lot now that you brought this topic up.
Let's talk about it.
Well, because something that we have talked about once or twice at least, I don't know if we have recently, is that, you know, at this point, maybe like 15 years ago or close to it, is when I started looking up and seeing like, am I asexual?
Yeah.
And I'm just like thinking about all this stuff that we've been talking about and just like, was that almost a relief to me to see myself in that? Like, oh, good. I don't have to be a sexual being because I think I'm asexual. Thank God, because sex is bad.
Ooh, yeah. No baggage there.
No.
Well, no, I literally, for a while, I had the same thought about, you know, being queer. I was like, maybe subconsciously, this is me just rejecting sex altogether.
Yeah.
In my case, it was sex with men. I was like,
right.
Oh, is this just a way to stop feeling shame about that? Like, I don't know.
Makes sense.
It's so weird to me that like the human sexual experience is just so broad. The fact that anyone would feel shame for, I don't know, having sexual preferences that are slightly different than their family of origin, for instance. Like when I hear that now, I have been educated, and so I'm like, oh, that's normal. There's nothing to be ashamed about. But there was a time not so long ago where I was feeling, you know, those attractions, and I did feel shame about it. And you just have to meet people wherever they're at with their shame journey, if you will.
Yeah, talking about this is just kind of sad to me that like both of us apparently were immediately rejecting things about who we are because we're like, oh, it's probably just because of this.
Yeah. I mean, we're just trying the best that we can. I think another way that, like, the only way you can get past shame is self-love, which is, like, a dirty word to us. I knew you would like, cringe.
I know. I was like, oh, my God, am I ever going to get past it then?
Well, that's where I'm at. This week, I've been asking myself, am I ever going to get past this? Because I can go through all the motions all I want. But as long as I feel shame about who I am, then I'm never going to be able to nurture myself into health and happiness, you know?
But I know, at least where I'm at, is even though what you say is true, absolutely, but I still feel like I will find a loophole so that I don't have to do that. It's like, oh, no. I will just do everything right in my life and I will stop associating with people that have the same mental illness as me that, you know, like I could get lumped into that group. I'll pretend like it never happened and, you know, tra-la-la. And that's how I'll take care of it. And it's like, no, because that's just saying, like, I can't handle this, that this part of myself exists. I can't handle that my past exists.
Well, yeah, and I think that's the most relevant thing we'll talk about today, honestly, is just the shame that comes with being associated with a mentally ill group of people or with a mental illness. I think it's safe to say a lot of our listeners have mental health issues or mental illnesses, and there's a lot of shame that goes into that. I mean, that's why this podcast was started, to kind of have a place to talk about this stuff without feeling ashamed about it. Because I know in the past, unless you were also talking about recovery,
yes,
like there was a lot of shame around.
You couldn't just exist with it.
Yeah, and I talk about it like I've completely gotten over that, but I still do feel shame sometimes coming on here and talking about, you know, all the doom and gloom we talk about. I mean, I'm always worried that I'll come across as glorifying it, you know? Mm-hmm. And then I get shame for that. It's like, if I'm doing badly, I feel shame. If I'm doing better, I feel shame. Have you ever felt like that? Like when you're doing better, you feel ashamed. Like, how dare I be doing better? Like, the world is so fucked up. All my friends are struggling. Like,
yeah. Usually, what I do then is if I've taken some sort of chance beforehand, like maybe when I was doing badly, then I was just like, okay, I know this is what I'm supposed to do. I'm going to reach out to people. So I do that. And then later, like you said, I'm doing better. And then I feel shame every time I see those same people that I like reached out to in my time of need. It's just like, I'm sorry, I'm okay now. I know. Does that make you think that maybe I was like making it up before when I wasn't?
Ooh, yeah. That's a big one. I mean, needing help.
Yeah, that's already really tough.
Like, how dare you need help? When I went to treatment and asked people for money, I felt a lot of shame about that. And then you're right. Like when I did eventually relapse again, I felt shame for wasting it, quote unquote. Mm-hmm. But again, it took seeing those people who donated to me like in real life and talking to them and seeing how much they cared about me and how little, like they didn't hold that against me at all. They had no expectations. It's like,
right.
These shames that have been holding me down for so long and just taking up every square inch of real estate in my brain, it's actually a tiny little like speck. Yeah. And all it took was kind of shining a magnifying glass on it and like talking to people to be like, you know, there's nothing wrong with me. I mean, well, maybe that's a poor choice of words. You know what I mean?
But yeah, everyone has their shit. There's nothing wrong with that.
Do you think there's a time when, in your experience, where you think the shame is valid? Maybe we're not the best people to ask, but I'm just curious if you think shame can ever be like conducive to growth, kind of like guilt. I think there are some people who think that shame can help keep people on the straight and narrow.
Absolutely. I don't think everyone's doing it like with an evil intent.
Of course not. You know, murder is wrong. It's one of the first things you learn. Yeah. It's like, okay, if you murder someone, you should feel shame about that. That is fine to teach a kid.
Yeah.
But
or because I think that that I can make this tie into our conversation. A random thought that came into my head. There was somebody that I worked with a Groupon in Chicago. So, I mean, this was like 2012. And I don't know why it came into my head. But for some reason, we were talking about people smoking. I was not a smoker at the time, but I obviously had been in the past and I would be in the future at that time. So I'm not going to be as harsh as I felt like she was. And I just remember she said, I hate smoking. I hate when people are smoking. Basically, if I see somebody smoking, then I assume that they are a terrible person.
Wow.
I was just like, that is hella judgmental. And yeah. I was thinking then that I was just kind of like, well, I see it more like, if I see an alcoholic, I don't assume they're a horrible person. If I see a drug addict, I don't assume they're a horrible person. Eating disorders are addictive. I don't assume you're horrible because you do that, you know?
Yeah.
I was just like, that's a really harsh judgment. So that's kind of where I can say, like, that's the difference of someone just clearly using shame to a negative effect and knowing it. I mean, if you have that kind of view, you know that that's what you're using it for. I feel like you're using it as a weapon.
Well, yeah, and it's done with intention. Like if someone straight up comes out and says, you know, I think people who smoke cigarettes are disgusting and have no self-control and don't care about the people around them, like that's judgmental as fuck. And that person is like instilling shame intentionally. Mm-hmm. I think, yeah, that's one thing to ask yourself. Like, do you feel shame because of what someone else is telling you to be, or do you feel shame because of what you are telling yourself that you should be?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or like you said, on the other side is, like telling someone like you should feel shame if you murder someone. I don't think that is like, that's not on the same drawing board.
Yeah, that's not what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
A disclaimer. Murder is bad. We don't endorse murder on this podcast.
Generally, no.
What are you feeling most ashamed about these days?
I think what we hit on earlier, not so much the first one where I said having problems in the first place, but not being fixed. I think I feel a lot of that right now.
Yeah.
And that is always hard to deal with, I think. Like, when you do get to a place like, I was recently in a bad spot. Now I'm in a better spot. I'm not in a perfect spot, though. That should just be common sense. Like, of course not. But I do feel like, no, I should have 180'd. I should be perfectly fine now.
Honestly, please don't take this the wrong way. But I'm so proud of the work you're doing, and I kind of expected you to relapse by now. I'm just, like, I say that to be like, you are doing an amazing job, and I think, oh, God.
I understand what you're saying, but I also kind of enjoyed that comment.
Thank you.
Possibly because I expected it as well.
Well, when I went to the psychiatrist the other day, he said he was surprised that I was still sober from alcohol since I saw him last. And part of me was like, excuse you.
Excuse you?
But also I was like, wow, defying expectations left and right.
Right.
But like, yeah, even though that comment could have been construed like negatively, I think it did kind of make me feel less ashamed of the progress that I have been making. Because, yeah, I did feel ashamed when I told him how much Benadryl I've been taking lately. Like, that made me feel fucking ashamed. But then he didn't make me feel ashamed about it. Instead, he was like, I'm so glad that you're not drinking.
Yeah, and really, I would take that from my outside perspective as him recognizing that it's just like, you have got a lot of shit going on in your life. You've got a lot of shit going on internally. So probably from his perspective, he's like, a lot of people that I know who also struggle with addiction would have turned back to it by now. You didn't. So yeah, it's really saying like, good job.
Shame is just never a good motivator.
Yeah.
It really isn't.
No.
Maybe one of these days we'll get it into our heads. I guess the thing I feel most ashamed of these days is just kind of being stuck as well. Like, I should be doing better by now.
Almost like when you took time off, like there should have been a time limit.
Yeah, I think it's so easy on this podcast to come across as someone who isn't afraid to have these conversations, who always speaks her mind and draws boundaries. But in real life, like, I don't always practice what I preach on the podcast.
Right.
Shocker. And I do have a lot of shame about it. Like you were saying earlier, you know better. I know that spending time with certain people is going to make me feel bad. I know that following my impulses is not going to be good a lot of the times.
And I think it is hard when we're doing this. It's like, hey, audience, you love it when we're vulnerable. Because I feel like
I don't know what you're talking about.
We do put ourselves out here like this, and it does kind of seem when you have a platform like this, like, again, no pressure from anyone else, but I feel personally the pressure that it's like I have to come back and be like, and then I did everything better.
Oh, yeah, I do that. I'm always trying to tie things together in a neat little positive bow, and I don't think we should feel ashamed at all for not having answers or for being messy.
Yeah, don't feel ashamed for being messy.
This episode has been us just giving ourselves a pep talk.
Yeah, which is okay.
Yeah, just keep telling people why they're awesome, because odds are they feel a lot of shame, and there's just too much of that in the world.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about anyone else, but sometimes I pre-shame myself if I think of something, like some like really good, genuine compliment that I'd want to give someone. It's just, I might immediately think like, oh no, they're going to be like, okay, thanks. And they're going to think I'm weird because I just said that out of nowhere. But really, maybe you are alleviating both your shame and theirs.
Seriously. Did you have any other things you wanted to talk about?
I have like a couple other notes I see that I took during the week, but they aren't really related to it. So I'm thinking like I'll just fashion those into another topic later.
Perfect. We're getting back in the swing of things, y'all, and we're trying not to feel too ashamed about it. Tell us what you're most ashamed of or what your tips are for getting past shame.
Yeah, how do you deal with shame?
Yeah, and Lauren, how can they get in touch with us about this topic?
Oh, shit.
What? Oh, shit. All our social medias are dead. No one can get in touch with us. Bye.
No, I just realized that I pulled up our old outline, but it hasn't been updated. So it just says Substack when ready to reveal.
Oh, well, today's the day.
So, Christina, where is our Substack?
Our Substack is located at picklesandvodka.substack.com. You should become a subscriber because everyone's doing it.
Join our chat.
Join our chat. Tell us about your shame. And Lauren, where can they find us on social media?
For everything else, you can check our Instagram. It's at Pickles and Vodka Podcast. You can email us, picklesandvodkapodcast@gmail.com. You can find us on Facebook, Pickles and Vodka, a mental health podcast. You can also see us on YouTube, Pickles and Vodka Podcast. And you can check any of our individual Instagrams at XDinaJumper, at Pico Suave, and at Lauren AFH.
All of our episodes are on YouTube now also, I forgot to say.
I know, that's why I kind of like choked over saying YouTube, because I was like, I should say something else about it.
It also sounded to me when you were saying our email address, it sounded like you said picklesandvodkapodcast@gaymail.com.
If there is a gay mail, we should also have an email address there.
Yes, gaymail.com. Also, for those who are interested, we have a free support group online with friend of the pod Orion every Saturday at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard. And to take part in that, you can go to join.freeconferencecall.com/picklesanonymous. That's it. We'll see you next week.
All right.
Knock on wood. Bye.